Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'd like to talk on second paragraph, actually second and third paragraph of page 94 of this text, opening the hand of thought. Let me read two paragraphs. Just as modern civilization exerts itself foolishly, ignoring the truth of human life, so immediately after the Buddha's death, practitioners with a small-minded attitude developed a mistaken trend. They misinterpreted the spirit of the Buddha's word, self settling on itself, seeking nothing else, to mean that one should become fixed on death. They thought that by extinguishing outwardly directed desires, they could arrive at a quiet nirvana. Consequently, their samadhi of self settling on itself came to mean an escape into a life devoid of activity except for a focus on death. It goes without saying that therein the truth of human life was lost. The misconception that Buddhism is isolationist and pessimistic can be attributed to this misinterpretation. Still, if one is not careful, the samadhi of self settling on itself can take on a retrogressive tendency to indulge in escapism. This point must always be borne in mind as we uncover Buddhist samadhi or zazen. In this part of this book, Uchiha Moroshi is talking about the significance or meaning of Buddhist practice of meditation in our tradition that is called Zazen. And he said, in this modern age, our human civilization is like a crazy, always trying to making our life better, more wealthy, or more convenient. And we chase after toward the certain goal to get more and more. And he called that is a crazy civilization. And in the previous sentence, paragraph, he said the basic fundamental attitude of Buddhist teaching from the Shakyamuni is we find the peace of mind within ourselves by settling ourselves on itself, within the self. And he said this kind of attitude may create a foolish civilization. So last week I talked about craziness and foolishness in Uchiha Moroshi's kind of a unique usage. Crazy means we only see one thing, and we ignore other things, and we think to get that thing or to reach that goal is only one possible or positive or meaningful way to live. That is what crazy means in Uchiha Moroshi's usage, and foolishness means we don't care. We don't need to go to certain goal, and we don't need to accomplish anything. Just be as it is. is okay. That is the meaning of the usage of Jamro's thing. He said, this modern civilization is like a crazy. And Buddhist attitude of being peaceful within the self right now, right here. So that means we don't need to go anywhere, just be here and now. That can be a foolish way of life. And what he's saying here is actually in the history of Buddhism, certain people interpret Buddha's teaching of settling within the self in such a kind of a foolish idea. That is what he's saying in the beginning of this paragraph. Just as modern civilization exerts itself foolishly, I'm sorry, but this is a mistranslation, I think. Itself not foolish, but crazy. But ignoring the truth of human life. So in modern civilization, we are too busy to accomplish something that is like a crazy, and Uchimura said that way of life, that attitude is came from the idea ignoring the truth of human life, one aspect of human life. So immediately after the Buddha's death, when Shakyamuni Buddha died, practitioners with a small-minded attitude developed a mistaken trend. And he is trying to say those people in early Buddhism developed a kind of a foolishness attitude of life he called foolishness. And this expression, English expression, practitioners with a small-minded attitude is a kind of a translation of Uchiyama Roshi's expression. No, the expression Uchiyama Roshi used, that is shoujo, means Hinayana. And in the fourth paragraph, he said there are other people who has a broader or larger minded. That is originally Uchiyama used the word Daijo. That is Mahayana. So he's saying those people are small-minded attitude immediately after Buddha's death means the early Buddhist after Buddha's death is called Hinayana. And Uchiyama Roshi is talking about from the viewpoint of Mahayana Buddhism. But problem is, this is not Uchiyama Roshi's personal idea, but from current kind of idea or theory among Buddhist scholars. This is a mistaken view, and that is true, I think. You know, in Japan, or Japanese people studied Buddhism only through only Mahayana Buddhism until the end of 19th century. So everything we know, Japanese Buddhists knew about Buddhism is from the Mahayana point of view. And within Mahayana sutras, so-called Hinayana is always criticized. but and until the middle of 20th century, this understanding continued. But now, Buddhist scholars have very different idea. So we need to, how can I say, change the picture of the Buddhist history. We need to be free from, not you, but we Japanese Buddhists need to change the picture of the history of Buddhism. So this is a kind of dangerous if we read what Uchamos right here, and this is true. And when we see and study the history of Buddhism in India, actually the history in India, there's no history. There's no historical record. So when we study the history of Buddhism, there's always difficulties. But even we don't know when Buddha lived, actually. But we, or Buddhist scholars, think Shakyamuni Buddha lived from 566 to 486 BCE. This is one theory. And the second is from 448 to 368 BCE. So almost 100 years difference, depending upon, this is from Theravada tradition, and this is from Mahayana or Chinese tradition. About 100 years difference, even when Buddha lived. And this date or year of Buddha's death was figured out based on King Ashoka. Only way we can guess when Buddha lived was about King Ashoka's life. King Ashoka became a king in 268, and he died 232. So that's the 3rd century BCE. And according to Pali text, King Ashoka became the king 200 before King Ashoka, and 200 years after Buddha's death. And in the text transmitted to China, it said about 100 years after Buddha's death. That this 100 difference came from. So we don't really know which is correct. But still in Theravada tradition, they think Buddha lived from 566 to 486. And Japanese scholars think he lived 448 to 368. So anyway, after Buddha's death, there is about 200 or 100 years before King Ashoka became the king. And King Ashoka supported Buddhism sometime after he became the king. King Ashoka was very capable warrior. And when he became the king, his empire was only a part of India. But within his lifetime, he almost united almost entire India and make one empire. To do so, he was always fighting and conquered other nations, other countries. But finally, when he completed this kind of a project, he found the final battle was really terribly miserable. So he didn't want to fight anymore. And he became a Buddhist. And after that, he tries to govern his empire not with military power, but with Dharma. And he supported Buddhism. That was a time Buddhist spread, supported by king and the government, and became flourished. So that is after about 100 or 200 after Buddha's death. This is what we call the immediately after Buddha's death. And shortly after, probably shortly after King Ashoka's death, Buddhist Sangha divided into two. One is the Sanghas of elders. Another is called Mahasangika. That means larger part of the Sangha. Because of certain points of Vinaya. Vinaya is regulations or rules. Anyway, before this division into two sects, modern scholars call this early Buddhism or pre-sectarian Buddhism. So this means about 300 years after Buddha's death. It's called early Buddhism. And from these two sects, there are many more divisions. Separation happened within next 100 years. It said about 18 sects divided. So from this time, scholars called the age of sectarian Buddhism. And about the first century BCE, so-called Mahayana Buddhism arose. So Mahayana Buddhism arose about 300 or 400 years after Buddha's death. And those people who supported or created Mahayana Buddhism criticized those monks at their age. And they called those monks in these sects as Shravakas. And there's another kind of group or category of monks called Purateka Buddhas. Purateka Buddhas are like a hermit who lived in the mountains and practiced by themselves and attain realization or awakening by themselves and live peacefully and die alone. So they are not really Buddhist, but they may have the same kind of understanding and awakening with Buddha. Those two kind of practitioners are called Hinayana from Mahayana point of view. So we need to think what we need to understand what Mahayana people criticized is not the people immediately after Shakyamuni Buddha, but the situation or condition of monks in the monks Sangha around the time of Mahayana Buddhism aroused. That is about 300 years, 300 or 400 years after Shakyamuni's death. So what Mahayana Buddhists discussing is not about the people immediately after Buddha's, but 300, 400 years after Buddha's. And even though Mahayana Buddhists called them pessimistic, and they practice only for themselves. But those people, those monks, are not lived by themselves in a forest. But after King Ashoka, Buddhism was supported by the king and the government, and many monasteries were built all over India. So Buddhism was really flourished. And that, being flourished is a problem, I guess, for Mahayana people. That means, Buddhist monks in that age could live within the monastery. And what they did was meditation practice and studying Dharma, Buddha's teachings. And they created a lofty, huge system of philosophy called Abhidharma. One of their methods of studying Dharma was discussion. Every day they discussed about each and every point of Buddha's teachings, and they, argue. And those discussions were recorded and became a huge text called Abhidharma. So they are not, the monks live in a forest by themselves alone. But from Mahayana point of view, they didn't have a contact with people in the world. They could live only within monastery and focus on meditation practice and studying that kind of lofty philosophical system. And I think immediately after Buddha's death, I don't think their Buddhist monks' activities are pessimistic or teaching are pessimistic and escapism. After Buddha's death, until King Ashoka start to support the Buddhist Sangha, I think Buddhism, developed and spread all over India. That's why I think King Ashoka can, in a sense, use Buddhist sanghas or institution to govern his entire empire. So I think their activities right after Buddha's death and before King Ashoka found Buddhism as his own guidance of governing his empire must be pretty active, and could work. They did work with people in the world. That's why they could spread all over India, and it is said Buddhism was supported mainly by merchants. That's why Buddhism could go across the border of India, because merchants traveled to the west and to the east to China, and that's why King Ashoka sent Buddhist monks to Alexandria, to the west. And he also sent Buddhist monks to Sri Lanka. That was the beginning of Theravada tradition. Anyway, when we see Buddhist history in India in this way, I don't think what Ujjwala is saying here is true. That means immediately after the Buddha's death, practitioners with a small-minded attitude developed a mistaken trend. I don't think that is true. Their attitude was not so small-minded, but they tried to study, preserve Buddha's teachings by making the three categories of Buddhist scriptures called Sutra, Vinaya, and Shastra, or commentaries. And they, traveled many places and spread the Dharma. So the image of escapism is made up by Mahayana Buddhist. So I think we need to be careful about this. They misinterpreted the spirit of the Buddha's word, self-settling on itself, seeking nothing else, to mean that one should become fixed on death. This is also criticism from Mahayana Buddhists to their teaching and practice. In the system before Mahayana, there are 4 stages of practitioners. The final stage is called Arahat, and the first stage is called entering stream. Anyway, it is said after the monks reach Arahathood, they don't transmigrate within samsara anymore, but they enter nirvana. And from Mahayana point of view, entering nirvana without being Buddha is something strange. But that is fact, this tradition was thinking. No one before Mahayana thought anyone besides Shakyamuni could become Buddha. So the highest stage Buddhist practitioners could reach was Arahat, become Arahat, when they became completely free from delusions and desires. They are called Arahat, and they stop transmigrating within samsara. So that is kind of a authentic teaching. But Mahayana people started to think we can be Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva means people who aroused so-called bodhicitta. One meaning of bodhicitta is way-seeking mind. Bodhi means awakening. So when Mahayana Buddhists thought each one of us, any one of us can arouse bodhicitta, means aspiration to seeking the awakening. Same awakening with what Shakyamuni Buddha attained. So that means all of us, all living beings, has a possibility to become Buddha. But people who reach Arahat lose the chance to become Buddha because they stop transmigrating. That was the problem for Mahayana people. That means they practice and enter nirvana by themselves, for themselves. And they don't care about other living beings. But in the stories about Buddha's previous lives, Buddha aroused bodhicitta many lives before he was born in India. And he practiced as a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is people who or person who allows bodhicitta and practice seeking awakening, that is bodhi. And in that process, it is said for more than 500 lifetimes, he practiced those 10 parameters. That is all for helping others. And after he became Buddha, he continued to teach and help others. So from Mahayana point of view, those people who enter nirvana without teaching others are kind of selfish. They studied Buddha's teaching and practiced meditation within the monastery only for their own personal awakening. And they don't teach and help living beings in the world. That was the criticism from Mahayana Buddhist to monks in their times. And that is what Ucham Roshi is saying, to fix on death means for those people, death is liberation, or to enter nirvana means to die. So dying is their goal, in a sense. But as a bodhisattva, we should keep transmigrating to help others. And until all living beings became Buddha together. That from that view, that idea, this teaching and practice seems selfish or kind of individual. They practice and study only for their personal liberation. So that is the origin of this idea Ucham was talking came out. And they thought that by extinguishing outwardly directed desire, so by eliminating their desires, they became arhat and stopped transmigration. They could arrive at a quiet nirvana. So their purpose or their goal is to die and not coming back this world. This can be, how can I say, the idea, this is not a good world. This is not a good place. So the goal of our life is to leave this world called samsara and reach somewhere else called nirvana. And that can be done by eliminating our delusions and desires. So our life needs to be very quiet. And only monks in a monastery could do such a study and practice. People, especially lay people working in the world, had no possibility to live in such a way, such a quiet way, being free from delusions and desires. So from Mahayana point of view, those monks study and practice in a quiet monasteries in order to escape from this world, even though those monasteries were supported by people. Anyway, consequently, their samadhi of self settling on itself came to mean an escape into a life devoid of activity except for a focus on death. So this is all from Mahayana point of view. So in this case, what Mahayana Buddhists are talking about is not about Buddhist monks immediately after Buddha's death, and also what Mahayana Buddhists talking about has nothing to do with today's Theravada Buddhism. But until the middle of 20th century, Mahayana Buddhists, at least in Japan, called Theravada as Hinayana. And that was, I think, in 1950. They had a World Buddhist Conference in Sri Lanka, and they decided this word Hinayana is never used anymore. But in I think Ujia Moroshi wrote this writing in late 1960 or 70. He still used, this word Hinayana. So today we don't use this word Hinayana, and we have to make sure that there's no such Buddhists who call themselves Hinayana. And there's no such Buddhist schools called Hinayana in the entire history of Buddhism. But this word Hinayana was the expression used only by Mahayana people to criticize certain conditions of the monks at their times. But the problem is in China and East Asian Buddhist countries, we studied Buddhism only through Mahayana Buddhism. So even here Ujia Moroshi used these words, and of course Dogen used the same words as Hinayana as a negative part of Buddhism. But this is a kind of a problem when we translate, especially Mahayana Buddhist text, including Dogen's writings. When Dogen used this word, this expression, Hinayana, how shall we translate? In this text, in this translation, we avoid using Hinayana and Mahayana. That's why we use this small-minded people, small-minded attitude. But I think when we translate Mahayana Buddhist text, including Dogen's writing, when this word shoujo is used, I think we should translate this as Hinayana. If I knew in one translation of Dogen's writings, or not Dogen, but some Mahayana Buddhist text, Hinayana was translated into Theravada. That was a problem. I think that created another problem. When Dogen wrote, for example, Shopo Genzo, he knew nothing about Theravada tradition. He used this expression, shoujo or Hinayana, only within the structure of Mahayana teaching. So what he criticized using this expression has nothing to do with those monks and Buddhist monks after this time. But if we translate Hinayana as Theravada, then it seems Dogen is criticizing today's Theravada, and that is not correct at all. So this causes a translation problem. Anyway, here we use this kind of not a technical Buddhist term, but small-minded and big-minded. But there is still kind of discrimination. So we must be careful about this point. even within Buddhism, there's a kind of a separation and can I say discrimination. So when I read this kind of writings by Uchiyama Roshi, I try to interpret what his writing is not about the history of Buddhism, but our attitude. Even we have a possibility to interpret this idea of self-settling within the self as individual kind of attitude of escaping, not work for the people or for the world. It's kind of individual practicing or studying Buddhism for only individual purpose. That is how I interpret this kind of writings. So what Uchiyama Roshi is saying here is not about certain people, but certain condition among Buddhist practitioners. If we practice just for the sake of my freedom or making myself a better person or being getting out of my personal problem, if we practice only for our own individual purpose, then we can be Hinayana. So in this case, this Hinayana is our attitude, Hinayana attitude. Practice and study Dharma only for this person. But especially, I have to say, Mahayana practitioners, we need to practice together with all beings. Here is a focus on the otherwise, our practice is a kind of method to die peacefully. And that is not what Buddha taught, I guess. Or I believe. And it goes without saying that wherein the truth of human life was lost means if we live in that way means just be right now, right here, without thinking about other people, and just be peaceful with this any condition of ourselves. Then we lost another truth of human life, same as when we work hard to gain some result. These are too extreme. So we have to find that truth of human life in a kind of a middle way between these two extremes. One is being crazy, another is being foolish. That is the point of what is Uchiyama Roshi is saying. So we need to understand, what he's saying here about Hinayana and Mahayana is not the point. And the next paragraph, the misconception that Buddhism is isolationist means I don't care about other people or individualism, and pessimistic, that means to die peacefully is the goal of our practice, can be attributed to this misinterpretation. Sometimes some people think Buddhism is a kind of a negative religion because Buddha taught life is suffering. But Buddha's teaching of life and suffering as the first noble truth is only part of his teaching. But Buddha taught that we can be free from suffering, or we can reach the cessation of suffering. That is another part of Buddha. So Buddha's teaching cannot be pessimistic or negative. But sometimes people think Buddhism has negative attitude toward life. So still, if one is not careful, the samadhi of self settling on itself can take on a retrogressive tendency to indulge in escapism. So we escape to the quiet place from the noisy, busy material world in the city, and live in a quiet mountains, or live in a quiet monastery, or escape to the Zendo and sit quietly. If that is the purpose, then our life or our way of practice can be called Hinayana or escapism. This point must always be borne in mind, keep in mind, as we uncover Buddhist Samadhi or Zazen. This word uncover is a translation of the word he uses, sai, hakutsu. I don't know if uncover makes sense. Hakutsu means, what is the word? It's like I don't know, to find some ancient things buried underneath. Excavation. So what he's saying is, this, how can I say, correct understanding, or Buddha's teaching, correct understanding of what Buddha taught about this expression, the self settling in the self, is buried and hidden underneath the earth. So we have to assignment again. We have to dig that and rediscover that treasure. That means even in the history of Mahayana Buddhism, there is the same problem. That is what Uchamurashi is saying. That somewhere else he said, Uchamurashi said, is traditional Buddhism has a huge temple buildings, but it's almost half, destroyed. But and not many people think there's something important in there, in the tradition of Buddhism. But we need to understand there's a very precious treasure in that half-broken temple. And we have to discover the precious treasure hidden within this half-broken temple, and study and apply, use this teaching within this modern times. That is what he wants to say by this word, that is uncover. That means actually, true meaning of Buddha's teaching is covered or hidden. Now we have to rediscover and study and practice it within this modern world. That is my understanding of these two paragraphs. And it's already 11:05. Any question or comments?
Sorry.
Please.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't stop me, does it?
Uh,
It seems to me
Uh-huh.
that the tension between the two schools,
Uh-huh.
or maybe the three schools, is in the Fourth Noble Truth.
Uh-huh.
And the implication of the Fourth Noble Truth
Mhm.
is that there is an escape or a finding of freedom
Mhm.
from samsara.
Mhm.
And so then the question becomes,
Mhm.
what is the escape? What pivot point would allow you to not undergo continuous rebirth, if that's a goal? And you can't even be sure that's a goal.
Mhm.
But I guess my question would be,
Mhm.
under the Mahayana concept, where you have a Buddhistic attitude that allows you to, through kind of an untraveled equilibrium of love, finally escape samsara, because that allows you to escape the suffering.
Mhm.
Wouldn't that itself be a continuous cycle? You would never give that up.
Mhm.
Well, is that right? Would you ever escape that cycle? Wouldn't the Mahayana teaching make you
Yeah.
continually
Yeah,
go
we
through the cycle,
stay in
which then
samsara.
defeats the implicit teaching
Mhm.
of the Fourth Noble Truth?
Mhm. So,
That's the
what's your question?
My question is, given the implication of the Fourth Noble Truth that there is an escape,
Mhm.
given the Mahayana teaching that you continue to recycle because of Buddhistic attitude,
Mhm.
where is the escape?
Where is the escape?
You would never, you're constantly trapped under the Mahayana teaching to come back and teach again.
Mhm.
So there's no escape. And so it defeats the purpose, the promise, the premise of the Fourth Noble Truth.
Mhm. That means what is the meaning of cessation of suffering in Mahayana teaching?
Exactly. And so the Hinayana would actually fulfill it, but it becomes a self-defeating in terms of the totality. And so I'm, as always, confused by the implications when you kind of spin them out. I don't see an escape under the Mahayana philosophical system.
Yeah, Mahayana is no teaching of no escape.
There is no escape.
There's no escape.
Okay.
But no escape is nirvana. That is what Mahayana taught. Mahayana, in Mahayana teachings, they kind of coined the expression about the nirvana. That is mu, ju, sho, ne, han. Mu is no, and ju means to dwell or abide. Sho is place, and nirvana. So they, in Mahayana Buddhism, they call this is the nirvana of bodhisattvas. That means no abiding or no dwelling. Means because of wisdom, bodhisattvas doesn't stay in samsara. And because of compassion, bodhisattva never live in nirvana. So he doesn't, bodhisattva neither escape from samsara nor entering nirvana.
Because of wisdom.
Because of compassion. Wisdom and compassion. Because of the wisdom, bodhisattva doesn't stay in samsara. But because of compassion, bodhisattva never left samsara. So bodhisattva is a kind of a paradoxical person.
It's a very nice construct.
Yeah, both are there. That is Mahayana teaching. And this Mahayana teaching came from actually Buddha's practice, Shakyamuni Buddha's practice. Buddha, I think I talked about this recently, but Buddha taught Four Noble Truths, suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the path which lead us to a cessation of suffering. So here are two cause and result. And within the structure of Four Noble Truths, this practice called Eightfold Noble Path is a path towards cessation of suffering. So that means from first to third, the path to transform our life from suffering to cessation of suffering. And that is Eightfold Noble Path. This is what Buddha taught when he first turned the Dharma wheel at the Deer Park to those 5 monks. But before he started to teach those 5 monks, first he saw those 5 monks. First thing Shakyamuni said was, I found middle way. And he said, the middle way are Eightfold Noble Paths. So this came before Four Noble Paths. That means, Four Noble Truths. That means for Shakyamuni found a middle way when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree. And that middle way is life based on the Eightfold Noble Path. So for him, Eightfold Noble Path is not a method to reach nirvana. But he found Eightfold Noble Path within his awakening. And after he became Buddha, his rest of his life, he practiced Eightfold Noble Path. So as for Buddha's practice, Eightfold Noble Path is not a method or means to reach nirvana, because he is already in the nirvana. And yet he didn't enter perfect nirvana and became a Pratyeka Buddha, but he decided to teach. That means he stayed in samsara. And the rest of his life, he taught he practiced Eightfold Noble Path by himself and taught the same path to the people who are in samsara. That means, Eightfold Noble Path is a middle way, or in a sense, healthy way of life. And when we are sick, this healthy way of life can be a medicine. But when people become healthy, what should they do? Continue the same practice and live like Shakyamuni Buddha did. That means whether we are sick or healthy, we have to practice the same practice, following Buddha's example.
Well, that would be consistent with 500 rebirths, or however.
Yeah. So our practice starts right here, but this practice, when we are deluded and transmigrating within samsara, and when we become free from delusion and stay in this world, in samsara, to share the Dharma with others, our practice is the same. Does it make sense? And
Yeah.
to live in that attitude is called nirvana of no abiding.
It makes sense if you can overcome your desire to just want to end it all.
Yeah. But even before we overcome what we have to do as a medicine to restore health is the same practice. But our practice is still incomplete.
Always by definition it's going to be incomplete.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Well, and that would, I could see how that could just lead you to believe there was no reason to make the effort. That you just get discouraged and give up.
No reason?
If there is ultimately no escape, then I can see, well, no, let me think about this.
Okay. Next week.
Thank you for being so patient with me.
Any other question or comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think next Sunday we are already